The hearing to consider the nomination of Troy Edgar to be Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and Dan Bishop to be the Deputy Director of the Office of Management Budget will come to order. For far too long, federal spending has increased unchecked, amassing over $36 trillion in debt that our children and grandchildren will one day inherit. Here in Washington, the default mindset seems to be just write another check, as though each new dollar of debt somehow doesn't matter. In the last 4 years, we have added nearly $6 billion a day, or $241 million per hour to our national deficit, for a running total of $8.5 trillion over the last 4 years. The unchecked and reckless spending spree in Washington over the last 4 years has put every American family on the hook for another $67,000 in debt. Yet despite this unprecedented level of spending, agencies continue to ask for more funding, more authority, more staff, while doing less and less for Americans. Unsurprisingly, Americans across the country have taken notice and voted for a change in the status quo. 1 month ago, President Trump, behind the wheel with a clear mandate from the American people to steer this country in a different direction, and he hasn't let off the gas since. The Trump administration, along with the new Department of Government Efficiency, has been hard at work identifying waste, fraud, and duplicative or outdated programs. Their efforts have revealed just how many billions of taxpayer dollars are slipping through the cracks, and they're moving fast to identify flagrant waste, fraud, and abuse across the federal bureaucracy. That's good news. The bad news is that unearthing waste is only half the battle. Real reform will require a complete disruption of how Washington operates, including Congress, and ultimately an affirmation of the savings by a congressional vote. Accountability cannot be outsourced. Real, lasting change demands leaders who aren't afraid to push back against business as usual, leaders who will stand up and say, we can't spend our way out of every problem. Which brings us to the two nominees appearing before us today. First, we have Mr. Troy Edgar, who has been nominated to serve as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. If confirmed, Mr. Edgar will take on the role of Deputy Secretary, serving as the department's Chief Operating Officer. DHS is a massive agency employing nearly 260,000 people across more than 20 components. Having previously served as DHS's Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Edgar has firsthand knowledge of where the department can make cuts and streamline operations. Second, we have Representative Dan Bishop, nominated to be Deputy Director of OMB. OMB is supposed to be the bulwark against overspending. We rely on OMB to carefully scrutinize agencies' budgets and identify redundancies. It is OMB's job to ensure that federal agencies are not rubber stamping costly new programs subsidized by the American taxpayer. If confirmed, Representative Bishop will have a front row seat to the entire federal budget process and a chance to say no when agencies continue to demand endless expansions in authority and unchecked spending. Both of these nominees have come forward at a time when Americans are fed up with government overreach and runaway debt. So, Mr. Edgar and Representative Bishop, we appreciate your willingness to serve and the experiences you bring to the table. If confirmed, you will each wield influence that can truly shape how this government operates and how it spends the public's money. The American people deserve an honest, efficient government that respects our hard-earned dollars. Thank you for joining us this morning to share how you plan to meet these responsibilities. I now yield, well, no, I don't yield to the ranking member because he's not here. The committee has received several statements in support of the nominees. Without objection, these letters of support will be made part of the hearing record. It is the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses. Mr. Edgar, Mr. Bishop, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Bishop is being introduced today by Senator Budd. Senator Budd, you are recognized for your introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. It's my honor to be here to introduce a good friend and colleague, Dan Bishop. Long before I was ever in Congress, when Amy Kate and I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, everyone would tell me, if you want to meet a great leader, get to know County Commissioner Dan Bishop. At that time, I was helping run a landscaping and janitorial business. I was in my late 20s, and I was probably a little too nervous to reach out and call him. I mean, it was a big county. Who knew then that years later I'd have the privilege to serve with Dan in the House of Representatives? I've seen firsthand his thoughtfulness, his deep understanding of the issues, his love for our country, his care for people, and his commitment to stopping runaway spending and getting the federal budget under control. I have no doubt that Dan will bring the same tenacity to the job at OMB that he has shown throughout his career, both as a litigator and his time serving the people of North Carolina in public office. Dan, Godspeed, and best of luck. And to the members of the committee, y'all be nice.
Thank you, Senator.
Representative Bishop, you're recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and members of the committee for this hearing. It's my first time on this side of the dais after 5 years in the House of Representatives, where I had the pleasure of working with several of you. If I'm confirmed, it would be an honor to serve our nation in a new capacity to implement President Trump's vision and agenda. I want to thank my wife, Jo, my life partner, and my son, Jack, who's working hard in law school today, for all that we've seen over the last decade, including my tenure in Congress and now this nomination process. It is a testament to Jo's much greater popularity that a number of congressional spouses are here with her today. My thanks to them for their kindness to Jo. And thanks also to my former congressional office staff, several of whom have come today as my dear friends. It's a tremendous honor to be nominated by President Trump to serve as the Deputy Director of Office of Management and Budget. Unknown by name to many, it does what the name implies: craft the President's budget, manage and coordinate among federal agencies, implement the President's regulatory agenda, and so on. It's a critical part of ensuring that the government responds to the democratically elected President in order to respond to the will of the American people and not to entrenched Washington interests and the political establishment. Something I always noticed in Congress when I was out meeting folks in North Carolina is that the American people are way ahead of us in Washington. They know what is going on. They're smart, resourceful, resilient, and hardworking. They want accountability, transparency, and an end to the waste and the Washington status quo. They recognized in this past election that our nation was at a crossroads on the precipice of either renewed greatness or ruin. In that precarious moment, they placed their confidence in President Donald Trump to usher in a new golden age for America. I'm here on behalf of that mission and the trust placed in President Trump by the people. Our children and grandchildren are being crushed under the massive burden of an out-of-control federal debt. For too long, we've been spending money we don't have on things we don't need. Our government has been self-absorbed, inefficient, unaccountable, and maladministered. The good news is we can fix all of those things, and if confirmed, I will be laser-focused on doing so, along with Director Russ Vought and the superb public servants at OMB. It's finally time for a government accountable to the people. I've fought to deliver that my entire public service career, from county commission to state legislature to Congress, and it will continue to be my North Star. Whether elected or appointed, we must never forget the right of the people to decide. I know that I will never forget it, and neither will Director Vought. I was thrilled to see Director Vought confirmed by the Senate, and I can assure you he is the man to get management of the federal government back on track. If confirmed, I look forward to serving as his deputy. Thank you for considering my nomination. I look forward to your questions.
I'm going to let him do his opening statement. Thank you, Representative Bishop. I also wanted to recognize our current Secretary of Department of Health, Secretary Christy Nome. Thank you for joining us today. At this time, I'm going to recognize the ranking member. We're kind of going out of order because he had another commitment at another committee, but for his opening statement.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that accommodation, Chairman Paul. Thank you, Mr. Edgar and Congressman Bishop for being here today. The Department of Homeland Security and the Office of Management and Budget, where you have each been nominated to fill very key positions, plays a critical role in strengthening our national security and ensuring that the federal government is operating effectively, efficiently, and in accordance with law. Mr. Edgar, as the committee considers your nomination, there are several questions about recent actions the administration has taken with respect to the Department of Homeland Security, where you are already serving, I understand, as a senior advisor to the Secretary. I'm concerned about the troubling reports of key DHS personnel getting fired indiscriminately, including staff at FEMA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as well as the U.S. Coast Guard. And I'm going to want to know more about the individuals who have been terminated, those who have been placed on administrative leave, and the reasons for the department's action. Specifically, I want to know what impact these terminations will have on DHS's ability to execute its vital national security missions, including disaster response and efforts to prevent cyber attacks. I am also alarmed that Elon Musk and DOJ personnel have been granted access to potentially very sensitive DHS data, which could violate cybersecurity and privacy laws. DHS holds some of the most sensitive data about Americans and American companies of any government agency, including their biometric information as well as private companies' proprietary information. Congress, the American people, need to know what data was accessed, how that data will be used, and more importantly, why. We need to know what kind of legal and security analysis was conducted before sharing this very sensitive personal information. We also need to know what this data was properly managed and not at risk of being stolen by any of our adversaries. Mr. Edgar, I hope that you will address these concerns and will demonstrate how you will work with Congress, the Secretary, and the administration to rectify these issues if confirmed. Today, we're also considering the nomination of Dan Bishop to serve as the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. The Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, is a critical office in the Executive Office of the President with significant responsibilities ranging from developing and executing the federal budget to improving agency performance as well as reviewing regulations. This role not only requires expertise in budgetary processes, fiscal policy, and government management, but a fundamental understanding and appreciation for the Constitution and the law, including spending laws passed by Congress on a bipartisan basis. Congressman Bishop, given your record and your views on allowing OMB to withhold federal funds, I certainly have serious concerns about your ability to carry out this very important role. As we saw recently with the funding freeze ordered by President Trump, communities across our country are counting on the funds appropriated by Congress to upgrade their roads and bridges, pay their first responders, and provide a host of other services. We need leaders at OMB who are committed to following the laws on the books, which includes the Impoundment Control Act. I'm concerned, if confirmed, that you will not carry out the laws of Congress that we pass, that is funding our communities, and that is simply unacceptable. I also have serious questions about your positions on the federal workforce. As I've said before, our nonpartisan civil service employees play a vital role in protecting our national security, caring for our veterans, and ensuring safety of our transportation system. Your record and views, including support for legislation that would make all federal employees at will, give me serious pause about how you would manage the federal workforce. And finally, I have questions about your record of disregard for independent oversight, including retaliatory actions by revealing the name of a whistleblower. I appreciate you being here today, both of you, to answer these questions and how you intend to manage the operations and the budget of the federal government if you're confirmed to this role.
Mr. Edgar is being introduced today by Senator Johnson. Senator Johnson, you are recognized for your introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce Mr. Troy Edgar, President Trump's nominee to be the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Edgar is from Los Alamitos, California, where he served as mayor and a county official for over 12 years. Troy is also a U.S. Navy veteran with more than 30 years of business and executive experience, providing leadership and advisory services to companies across a range of industries, including in aerospace and defense, government sector, high-tech, software, and telecommunications industries. Troy first came before this committee when President Trump nominated him to serve as Chief Financial Officer at DHS. In that role, he was responsible for the fiscal management, integrity, and accountability of the department's $90 billion budget, supporting 240,000 employees. Prior to DHS, he was an executive at IBM, running a part of their federal consulting business. I also want to acknowledge a letter of support from the CEO and chairman of IBM, Arvind Krishna, and ask that it be entered in the committee record.
Without objection.
Troy spent nearly a decade in the aerospace industry at Boeing, where he was the CFO of a military aircraft logistics division. He has held many key positions within manufacturing, logistics, information technology, and procurement, which makes him an ideal fit for the position of Deputy Secretary of DHS. Mr. Edgar earned his Bachelor of Science and an MBA from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He is joined this morning by his wife, Betty. His business and government work experience and strong support from President Trump will help Troy find success as Deputy Secretary of DHS. I encourage all on this committee to swiftly confirm him to this position. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Edgar, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, distinguished members of the committee, it's an honor for me to appear to you today as the President's nominee to be the Deputy Secretary for Homeland Security. I want to also recognize and thank Senator Johnson for that very kind introduction. Thank you, sir. I'm grateful to President Trump and to Secretary Noem for the trust and confidence that they've placed in me. And I thank the committee for considering my nomination. I'm honored that Secretary Noem has taken time out of her busy schedule today to be here with me in support of my nomination. Thank you for being here, Madam Secretary. Appreciate it. The process has enabled me to better appreciate the high honor bestowed upon me to serve the American people and better understand the critical expectations and committee that the committee may have for me if confirmed to be the Deputy Secretary. Thanks to my Lord for his grace and on my life and the opportunity to serve my country. My family is very important to me, but they are not here. I'd like to recognize them. Matt, Tyler, and Ethan are my sons. My brother is Tracy, and I honor the memory of my mom and dad, Ralph and Maxine. I'd like to introduce my precious wife, Betty. Betty embodies the American dream in a manner that enables me to understand the hopes and aspirations of millions of people who come to America. Her story helps me understand the true weight of public service. I'm not only come to this nomination with technical skills and business experience, but with the conscience informed through my personal experience with my wife. Betty is an immigrant from Iran who spoke Farsi, Aramaic, and French growing up in Tehran. Her family fled to the United States after the Shah was overthrown in 1979. When she arrived, she learned English and Spanish and then attained a bachelor's and master's degree in French. She has been a French teacher in La Quinta High School in Orange County for over 25 years. Betty rises every morning believing that she has the ability to change another student's life for the way that this country has changed hers. Thank you, Betty, for being here to support me. I've had the honor of previously working with this committee in the first Trump administration, as Senator Johnson said, in my Senate confirmation for being the DHS Chief Financial Officer. When I left being the CFO of DHS on January 20th, I was managing a $90 billion budget and over 250,000 employees. That role allowed me to learn and resource the entire department, not just the important border security and immigration components. It is with this unique knowledge and my significant business experience that I'm confirmed, and I intend to honorably serve President Trump, Secretary Noem, and the American people to the best of my ability. The DHS Deputy Secretary serves as the Chief Operating Officer, as Senator Rand Paul had said. And if confirmed, I will stay focused on supporting the Secretary and ensuring that we are effectively and efficiently using the policies and resources provided to meet the President's goal on immigration, border, and other national security missions of DHS. Furthermore, I'll fully support the hardworking professionals of DHS by helping provide the resources they need to fulfill their critically important missions. If confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee and other members of Congress to assist you in the important role of oversight and support of the department. I'm committed to investing the time to build the critical working relationships needed to help significantly advance DHS. As stated earlier, I would like to thank Mr. Arvind Krishna, Chairman and CEO of IBM, the National Sheriff's Association, and the major county sheriffs for their letters of support for my nomination. Thanks again for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgar. We will now proceed to questions where each member will have 5 minutes. I want to be clear from the outset that the committee will not tolerate any disruptions. I will direct the Capitol Police to immediately remove any member of the audience that disrupts the hearing. Mr. Edgar, Mr. Bishop, do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes.
Yes, with advice of counsel. Yes, sir.
Thank you. While the Secretary is still here, I want to put in one plug for both of you. At the DHS, there's a National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasure Center called NBAC. They do gain-of-function research in a supposed to be very safe lab, but we want more oversight as to what specific experiments are going on there, and we've sent requests, and we just hope that you'll keep complying. I don't need an answer necessarily for that. And with that, I'm going to pass my time to Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, the witnesses, for being here, for what you walked through already, and the million forms you've already filled out, and the details that you've already done on this. Mr. Edgar, I do have to say, though, after your introduction of your wife, I am open to actually moving her to that seat rather than you in that seat, to have her to be able to take charge of this as well. So it's very kind of you both introducing your families and your wife to be able to come in. Secretary Noem, good to see you. Thanks for what you've already done and the engagement that's here. Let me walk through a couple of things on this as quickly as I can on this. Mr. Edgar, you've done a lot of the work behind the scenes. This committee in the days ahead will work a tremendous amount on trying to get the funds to DHS that they need to actually implement the border security that is desperately wanted by the American people on that. Without question, additional dollars are needed, but without question, there's also waste in the structure. You and I have talked about $20 million a month that's being spent on soft-sided facilities, and there's multiple of those. $20 million a month for giant tents that are up there. We've talked about GSA and the frustration with CBP in GSA facilities that are organized where GSA's put in a $14,000 urinal, or they've sold a parking lot for $1 to the local community, only to a couple of years have to buy it back for $1 million on it. The challenges that they've had where CBP has said we need more lanes, and then GSA designs a building that actually has fewer lanes of entry, saying this is based on their design. We've got to be able to figure out how to be able to deal with the waste, but also to be able to implement policy quickly. What would you do to be able to help the communities on the ground and the leadership on the ground efficiently be able to do the mission?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'd start, first of all, having the opportunity to be in the CFO for DHS and looking at all 23 components. The two that you're talking about mainly, or the main one you're talking about, CBP. I think right now the organization is very focused on an immigration and border security mission. And I think if confirmed to be the Deputy Secretary, I would work not only with CBP but ICE. I think that the facilities that you're talking about potentially could be leveraged in the same vein that ICE is going to need about 100,000 detention beds. CBP has, like you said, potentially availability within soft-sided tents. My job as being the previous CFO and now, if confirmed, to be the Deputy Secretary, is to make sure that we're not being wasteful, that we're being responsible with our spending, that we're leveraging all the contracts across the government to be able to get to our mission and really execute on President Trump's agenda.
Well, it'd be helpful, and we'll walk through that process together. We don't mind allocating the dollars as long as they're spent wisely in the process on it. The American people can go, that's where I want my tax dollars going on this. HSI, DEA, and FBI, great letters around here, but they are a challenge at times to be able to cooperate together on it and try to be able to keep from mission creep. Your oversight and Secretary Noem's oversight in this process over Coast Guard, over all things border, over FEMA, over Secret Service. There's a lot of tasks that are out there, but a lot of coordination that has to happen as well. what needs to be done in your view at this point to make sure that we're actually on mission and that we're actually working with other agencies to make sure that, for instance, Secret Service is doing what it can do well and not getting into other areas. HSI is doing what it can do well and not getting into DEA areas, and for instance.
I think what has happened at the very beginning is President Trump set the agenda. He created the executive order that created the Homeland Security Task Force. We follow the leadership of Secretary Noem. We'll be joint task force relays a combination of the Department of Justice with all the law enforcement agencies that you're talking about, and within HSI, ERO of ICE and CBP. We'll have the whole of government that we'll bring to that. That task force will take on cross-government type activity, and not only just being able to do border security, but I actually bring the full power of enforcement out to law enforcement. It has a steering committee that they'll appoint people. It'll be chaired by Attorney General Bondi and Secretary Noem, and we'll follow their direction going forward.
Okay, we look forward to that coordination, make sure we're actually cooperating together as efficiently as we can. Mr. Bishop, it's good to see you. Thanks for your leadership and what you've done for the country already, and the sacrifices you've already made on that. You and I have talked a little bit about there are federal agencies and a federal law already, I should say, that requires E-Verify for federal contracts. We have now learned that's actually not being enforced. So we don't know how many people are not legally present in the country that are also executing federal contracts or at work for the federal government on this. That's federal law already, and you and I have already spoken on this, and your assurance to me was we're going to actually make sure we're implementing the law in that area, that we're doing the oversight that's need to be done. Is that true?
Absolutely, Senator, and I know that you're a student of all the details that OMB is in command of, and I believe, and we certainly will use that office as tools to see to it we have consistency in enforcement.
Well, that's terrific. We have something called the Federal Program Inventory that's new. That's one of those areas that we passed a law actually 6 years ago called the Taxpayer's Right to Know. That's still being implemented, but for the first time we give this body the ability to be able to see in duplication, and we look forward to that full implementation.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, gentlemen, I've sent numerous oversight requests to both DHS and OMB since the start of this administration, and unfortunately have received little or no response or responsive documents or information as a result of these requests. For example, 2 weeks ago, I asked OMB about the administration's illegal funding freezes. This committee is responsible, as both of you know, for oversight of all of these agencies. So my question for each of you is, if confirmed, do you commit to ensuring that OMB and DHS promptly answers requests for information as we fulfill our oversight role here in this committee? Information from me, all of my colleagues, as well as my staff. And I hope this is not a hollow promise. Mr. Edgar?
Yeah, if confirmed, I'll follow and any lawful request from you, sir.
And you understand our role as the Chief Oversight Committee, that is, we need to work together on that, but we have to have information.
Yes, sir.
As do I, Senator, subject to the advice of counsel and direction of Director Vogt, of course, that Director Vogt's already made clear we want to maintain transparency at the Office of Management and Budget, and that he will personally be aware of every request made by a member of Congress, and I'll see to it that I am as well.
I appreciate that. Can you commit, both of you commit to providing the information within 2 weeks of assuming your office, Mr. Bishop?
Well, sir, I'm not certain what the processes at OMB will permit. I certainly think they need to be provided in an expedited way, and we'll certainly work to that end within the department according to its processes.
And if it can't be done in 2 weeks, you'll tell us exactly why it cannot be provided in 2 weeks?
Sir, I would certainly commit to following the processes at OMB to that effect. Yes, sir.
And let us know. Appreciate that. Mr. Edgar?
Yeah, same thing. I'll follow the processes, and I hope that we are able to maintain a very transparent relationship with this committee. Thank you.
Good. I'm now hearing from several agencies that this administration has instructed its staff to not communicate with members of Congress and our staff. My question for each of you, are either of you aware of this directive that's coming from the Trump administration to not talk to members of Congress? Congressman Bishop, that should be pretty outrageous to you.
Senator, I'm unaware of that. I did encounter such instructions by the prior administration when I was a member of Congress, But I can't speak to it. I'm serving as a senior advisor, haven't been involved in anything of that kind, sir.
And you'd push back against anything like that?
Well, I certainly would want to ask questions about it and learn what the reasons are and the processes that have led to that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Edgar.
Yeah, same thing. I'm not familiar with with what you're specifically talking about, but I'd be open to taking a look at that once. If
And you understand how wrong that is?
Yeah,
To have that kind of directive would be wrong?
yeah.
Yes, is that the, for the
Yeah,
record, yes.
like I said, I don't, I'm not familiar with that directive. If that was a directive, we would look at it. I would work with the
You would look at it and say that's wrong?
I don't know what the directive is specifically.
The Trump administration is currently indiscriminately firing civil service servants across the federal government. These actions, in many ways, are harming public services across the country. But it appears the administration has not done any analysis about how this impacts customer service and, even more importantly, national security. Congressman Bishop, do you support, and this is just a yes or no answer, pretty easy, do you support the administration's recent efforts to indiscriminately remove civil servants from their positions?
Well, I can't answer yes or no, Senator, because I believe the premise is wrong. I don't believe the administration's proceeding in an indiscriminate way to terminate employees.
So you have seen the analysis that's gone for each employee as to why they've been terminated?
No, I certainly haven't. But
How can you make that statement if you haven't seen that analysis?
Because I know that Donald Trump, President Trump, and the folks who are working hard in the White House every day to do the will of the American people are not proceeding in a way that is indiscriminate, Senator.
So when you get in, if we ask for information as to why these particular individuals were, you'll be able to provide it to show that it was not indiscriminate?
Certainly, Senator, subject again to the processes at OMB, the deliberative processes, and the advice of counsel.
Mr. Edgar?
Yeah, same thing. As I think the process that we're going to go through, I also believe that it's been a lawful process that is followed by President Trump, and I look forward to continuing to work with President Trump and Secretary Noem to carry out these.
So you're at DHS now, as we talked about when you came into the office, and now we know we have layoffs that could definitely impact national security operations, firings of personnel at CISA, at FEMA, at TSA. So these are indiscriminate, or have you actually seen detailed analysis before each individual is fired?
No, I have not. I'm serving as a senior advisor, so I've not seen that. I would say, though, that these are legal orders coming through the executive order process with the president. I'm sure that he's duly informed and knows exactly what he's focused on, and it's got the right protection with
So
the
if
General Counsel.
confirmed, will you will then be in a position to analyze both the impact as well as the criteria? Will you do that, and will you be transparent about that?
Yes, I will work with the secretary. We'll make sure that we can continue out our mission while we're trying to also get to the objectives of trying to save money, waste, fraud, and abuse from the government.
We all want to save money, waste, fraud, and abuse. We all are. Everybody here in this committee is all about that. We don't want to jeopardize national security. We want to make sure that thoughtful decisions are being made before folks are terminated, not indiscriminately. And clearly, you can meet the objective of fraud, waste, and abuse in a thoughtful manner and not indiscriminate. But you need to be transparent about that. That's in order to have trust in the process. So
Yeah,
I look
would
forward to
agree with
working
that.
with you if confirmed.
Thank you.
Senator Johnson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Edgar, Mr. Bishop, I think you're both aware of the fact that I've been talking quite a bit about returning to some pre-pandemic level of spending. Mr. Edgar, you obviously have experienced the CFO of DHS and an awful lot of private sector experience. What drives me nuts around here, as coming from the private sector, is nobody seems to use a budget the way families use a budget and the way businesses use a budget. I mean, I use the analogy, I don't think any family, if they have a serious illness, they have to borrow $50,000 to pay for medical bills. That family member gets well, they continue to borrow $50,000 and spend at that level. But that's exactly what we've done here at the federal government. We went from $4.4 trillion in 2019 to averaging $6.5 trillion in the next 5 years. Last year we spent 6.9. This year we're on course of spending $7.3 trillion. So first of all, both you gentlemen, do you think there's any justification for us to be spending after the pandemic has wound its way down at $7.3 trillion, 61% above where we were in 2019? Mr. Edgar.
First of all, I think that what we're going through right now, what you're talking about, is potentially a reconciliation bill that would be spending up to a higher level than what we would normally spend. I think at this point, if you look at what the charter and the focus is for the agenda for President Trump, this is truly money that is needed to be able to get through and make sure that we can make good on the promises of sealing the border and interior enforcement. I think over the long term, my commitment to you and to this committee as the previous CFO is that this spending level is not sustainable. And my focus would be to work with the Secretary and our staff to look at the longer term sustainability. Once we are able to get through the agenda, get numbers down, continue our partnerships with the DOD, we'll get to a spending profile that long term will be more sustainable and responsible.
So, Mr. Bishop, we've had a number of conversations along this line. You're smiling. As a candidate, did you ever talk about zero-based budgeting by any chance?
I certainly did, Senator.
Do you know a lot of other members who talked about zero-based budgeting?
Yes, absolutely.
You think they were serious about it?
Well, the result hasn't gotten there, has it, Senator? And you've been struck a consistent theme in making this point, which is, I'd say, somewhat inescapable, that there's no reason for the government to have grown permanently in the COVID era. So
just to review, I've looked at a number of pre-pandemic baselines. One was 1998, Bill Clinton, where we actually had a surplus. That was voted for by people like Senator Durbin and Schumer and McConnell and Grassley and Collins and John Thune in the House. Very bipartisan bill. If we increase that $1.65 trillion by population growth and inflation, leaving today's Social Security, Medicare, and interest in place, that would give us $5.5 trillion worth of baseline spending. 5.5, that's what President Biden projected as revenue. That's how close we are to balancing a budget if we'd return to that baseline. If you go to Clinton, 2014, do the same thing, plus it up for population growth, inflation, use this year's Social Security, Medicare, and interest, be $6.2 trillion. Now, I don't even like talking about 2019 because that gives us a figure of 6.5, but there's the range, $5.5 to $6.5 trillion as a pre-pandemic baseline spending. My question, how do we return to that? I mean, the House is obviously, and I appreciate their efforts, they're having a really hard time. I keep talking about death by 1,000 cuts. If you start at $7.3 trillion, you can't cut that. But again, it's entirely reasonable to say, let's return to a pre-pandemic level baseline, plus up for population growth and inflation. And again, if you have to add some for defense or for obviously border security, which we're trying to do in this first reconciliation package, how do we accomplish this? I mean, how do we turn what DOGE, and I don't necessarily agree that the ranking member says we all want to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, the way they're howling about the outrageous waste, fraud, and abuse that DOGE is uncovering doesn't seem like they're real serious about eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. But how do we translate what DOGE is finding into real spending savings? How do we return that pre-pandemic using reconciliation? Mr. Bishop, you seem ready to answer.
Certainly it is something that requires, obviously, actions in Congress, ultimately. And so what's going on in the House, what you guys have begun in the Budget Committee here in the Senate, and I appreciate the point that you've made, Senator, a lot, about this fundamental idea about getting spending back to a pre-COVID sort of concept. And I would say that over at OMB, there's a deliberative process going on. Director Vogt is very serious about the topics you're focusing on here, and there's a deliberative process ongoing now. It'd be inappropriate to get ahead of it about how the president weighs in on this process, on the process that's going on here in Congress toward reconciliation.
If confirmed, I just count on both of you working very closely with me to try and accomplish exactly that, return to some reasonable pre-pandemic baseline of spending.
I look forward to having those conversations. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bishop, I wanted to start with you. I guess I was concerned by what I just heard in terms of your previous response. So you believe that the firings that have happened and the layoffs that have happened, you said that they are not indiscriminate?
Yes, Senator Kim, I don't believe that President Trump or the people at PPO or the folks who are around or in the White House policy-making operation would proceed in a way that is indiscriminate with respect to.
So in terms of the fire, I mean, we're seeing firing based off of status of being probationary. both in terms of new hires as well as probationary, also includes those that have been recently promoted, and they are new in that position because they've been promoted into that. And we've seen mass layoffs of that status because, frankly, I guess it's easier to be able to fire them. You don't consider that to be indiscriminate?
Senator, I do not. The folks who are advising the president have made points about believing that the federal employee workforce is not at the right size. It needs to be right size.
So when we were seeing the National Nuclear Security Administration, we're seeing hundreds fired there, later to be reinstated. I mean, did that not seem like that was indiscriminate initially? And then they realized, hey, look, that actually probably the nuclear functions of the United States is important. I mean, we're seeing just the level in which this is happening. Do you think that was an appropriate move to initially fire them?
I think the president has spoken directly to that, or spokespeople for the president have, that in the course of making changes, you may find that you need to then move in the other direction to make an adjustment after you've made the first change. In my view, Senator, that doesn't make it indiscriminate.
Mr. Edgar, I guess I'd like to turn to you and just get a sense, what was the reasoning for the firing of 130 employees at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency?
Yeah, as a senior advisor, I wasn't responsible for that. But I guess what I would say, just as a response, is if you look at this outside of federal government, the process that you're talking about whether we're being indiscriminate or not, I mean, this is something that all Fortune 500 companies do. To me, this does not seem out of the norm. And you would normally go to reflect on more junior people, especially if you had to make a head cut reduction and you needed to be able to go through a process to be able to get to that. So to me, this seemed totally logical.
Well, I guess what I'm just trying to think that we have incredibly important procedures going forward. So for instance, the Cyber Safety Review Board under DHS was revoked. The membership there revoked.
Yeah.
You think that was a good idea?
I do. I think it was a great idea.
You think it was a great idea, even though that is the board that is overseeing the investigation on Salt Typhoon?
Like
Explain that.
I said, I didn't make the decision to do it, but I think it was a great idea. I think that CISA has overstepped its boundaries and authorities. I think it needs to be reeled in, and it starts with that steering committee. I think they need to be reconstituted.
So who is conducting the investigation on Salt Typhoon right now at DHS?
CISA.
CISA's doing
Yeah.
it. So they've taken over the review of the Cyber Safety Review Board?
Well, at this point, that review board will be reconstituted at the right time, but as an organization, it continues with its priorities set.
Well, if it's going to be reconstituted, why was it decommissioned to start with? Well, at least why were the members taken off?
Like I said, I thought it was decommissioned because that it was going in the wrong direction. It starts with the leadership there.
I wanted to just switch gears here, Mr. Edgar. I guess I wanted to just get your response, just have you on record when it comes to the temporary protected status. We've seen the revoking of that for Haiti, for Venezuela. I guess I just want to ask you, do you not believe that consideration of safety of individuals is something that we, as the United States, should take into account when we're thinking about how to proceed with legal pathways to immigration?
I think temporary protective status is just that, temporary. I think the Secretary reserves the right and the opportunity to go in and look at what the policies are, either for Venezuela or Haiti. And I think the Secretary has taken appropriate action to make sure that she reserves her opportunity, that Secretary Mayorkas had really pushed up and really kind of overdid what his authority was. And I think we're just putting more options on the table for the Secretary to make her decision.
When it comes to FEMA, in the past, you've called it a great organization, great people, their mission drives their organization at all levels. What we're seeing at USAID and other aspects of the federal government, should we expect that at FEMA? Are we going to see a rapid abolishment of FEMA?
I think I would agree with the president. I think we need to reevaluate what the direction is that we're going to go with FEMA. It's got a lot of issues that need to be dealt with structurally. You know, as you know, it's structured in two different ways, the disaster recovery fund and the non-disaster recovery.
Yeah. So just here at the end, I guess I just want to say, and we talked about this, is like I think everyone here understands there needs to be reforms when it comes to FEMA. What has been happening hasn't been working. I say this from New Jersey, crushed by hurricanes, problems on that front. But I really do urge you and the Secretary, and I've talked about this before with her, that try for us to have a bipartisan approach to this. Work with this committee to try to address it. If we see just a quick gutting of it, it's just going to leave American people unsafe, insecure when it comes to disasters that can affect every aspect of this country. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the nominees for being here today. We truly do appreciate your service. Congressman Bishop, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, sir. As chair and founder of the Senate DOJ caucus, I am very laser focused on making sure our government is responsive to our taxpayers and ensuring our federal workforce is actually serving the American people. Today, I want to focus on taxpayer-funded union time, okay, which requires federal agencies to pay employees for time spent working for their union, not the American people. The Biden administration took several steps to hide the costs of taxpayer-funded union time from the American people, including rolling back President Trump's executive order to prevent union time abuses and increase agency oversight, pulling down annual reports on the cost of taxpayer-funded union time off of OPM's website, and hiding annual reports OPM had previously published. Meanwhile, as part of my investigation into telework, I learned teleworking HUD employees were reportedly paid for performing union duties, despite one being in an Oklahoma jail for drunk driving and another in Puerto Rico vacationing during duty time. Even more alarming, HUD told me it wasn't even aware of this because there was no way to verify when or even if employees are engaging in union duties. So, Congressman Bishop, will you commit to working with Director Vogt and OPM to restart those annual reporting requirements?
Thank you, Senator. And I followed closely the work you've done in that area, and chairing the DOJ caucus, and also concerning the back to work issue with federal employees. And so thank you for that. And OMB and OPM do have a close working relationship. I'm coming to learn about it as a senior advisor, not yet confirmed, but certainly I'll take that back to Director Vogt. And I think the issues you're speaking to are quite significant. And of course, I won't be deputy director and implement my policies, but the policies of President Trump, and follow the direction of Director Vogt. But certainly, and look forward to looking into the issue and communicating with you about that, and making sure the information you need is readily available.
That's great. Thank you. In 2019, some of those agencies refused to provide OPM with data. Will you ensure all agencies are responsive to OPM when it solicits information on taxpayer-funded union time?
It's very important that Congress receive the oversight information it needs, and there's a deliberative process that I'll work with, of course, at OMB, but certainly want to, subject to advice of counsel and direction of the director of OMB, provide everything we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly, is there something we can do to make sure agencies are appropriately reviewing taxpayer-funded union time payments?
Well, I can't make a specific commitment on that, Senator, because there are deliberative processes at OMB, of course, to follow. But certainly, I think it's an issue that needs to be front and center, and we'll look at it hard.
And assuming your confirmation, I hope that we work together on this issue. It is a big one for our taxpayers. So in the time that I have left, politicians and bureaucrats in Washington seem to be a lot more upset that DOJ is finding waste, fraud, and abuse than about the nonsense that we have funded in the first place. You can hear all of these big spenders squealing all the way from Iowa. And every taxpayer should have the ability to look and find the same waste DOJ is exposing. But there are nearly 50 federal agencies right now that are not reporting their spending on usaspending.gov, accounting for more than $5 billion each year. So, Congressman Bishop, every American can be one of our DOJ deputies just out across the United States, but they actually need OMB's help to do that. Will you require all agencies provide timely, accurate, and complete reporting of their spending?
I can tell you, Senator, that the with the scope of USA spending and the items that are not on there is something that I've learned a great deal about since being nominated and researching that. It's a very significant issue to me. I will be paying very close attention to it should I be confirmed as Deputy Director.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And my time has expired, but thank you. I think we've got a lot of issues here, and I look forward to working with both of you on these issues. Thank you.
Senator Slotkin.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Congressman Bishop, good to see you. We were neighbors for a short time in Longworth when we were both members of Congress. And separate from being good office mates, I'm really concerned about the view that you and Director Vogt and the President have expressed on the executive branch and the President having the unilateral ability to spend federal dollars despite what Congress appropriates. And I will skip the irony of a congressman who ran for office and was deeply involved in appropriating dollars and voting on those things for years and years and years, now being seemingly willing to give up that authority. It's a fundamental principle of the Constitution. The Supreme Court, starting back in 1975, has said that, as the Constitution says, this body, which Republicans now control, both houses of, appropriates the dollars, and the federal government spends them accordingly. This has been reiterated by the courts. Can you tell us your position as Deputy Director of OMB? Do you believe that President Trump has the ability to spend appropriated dollars in different ways than they were appropriated?
Thank you for the question, Senator Slotkin. President Trump has run on the issue of impoundment. There will be a process in the administration, the decision-making involving lawyers. I will not be serving as Deputy Director in a legal capacity, but there'll be folks who are looking at the legal issues you describe. But
it's just your view. I understand lawyers, but your personal view, like, just be open with it. Vogt was very open about it. Do you believe that if this chairman appropriates dollars that are voted on by this Senate, that you and the President Trump have the ability to spend those dollars in different way than your Republican chairman has appropriated?
Well, Senator, I support the views of President Trump and Director Vogt on the subject.
So yes, Mr. Vogt owned it. You should just own it. So let me ask this question. If you believe that to be true, do you believe that you have the right to unilaterally take money out of Social Security? Not that you will, but that you have the right.
Senator, the President's made very clear that I'm not going to touch Social Security, but and you're speaking to hypotheticals. I would say I don't think that
it's not a hypothetical if every single Michigander that I talk to is worried about you cutting their Social Security benefits, their Medicare benefits, their veterans benefits, the post office, right? I was just up in very red conservative Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right? I'm the only Democrat there.
Right.
And they are like happy, as you said. There's people who are perfectly happy with cuts that are going on, but they are desperately worried that you are going to cut their Social Security, their Medicare, their veterans benefits, and the Postal Service. And despite everyone saying they're not going to touch it, you are smarter than that and know that the big cuts that you are calling for need big chunks out of these programs.
Senator, I don't hesitate to say that I do not believe that the President can stop Social Security benefits being paid. I don't think so.
You don't think he can pull money out of Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits?
I don't.
And the Postal Service?
And of course, the reason I say the President said he's not going to is because that's what he's consistently declared, so I don't think it's an issue. But
if you look behind the numbers, and you guys are looking for $6 trillion, DOJ is looking for that. You guys have been open about it, which I appreciate. $6 trillion doesn't come from $1 million here and $1 million there. It comes from cutting big programs. And what you are saying is, despite what everyone says here, you are working for, you proudly support this idea that you can move money even though it's been appropriated for a certain reason. So I don't think any American, red, blue, purple, the whole thing, should trust that these programs that they've worked their entire life for are safe if you believe you can do anything that you want.
Well, there are distinctions to be made, Senator. So to the point you suggested hypocrisy about serving in Congress and then taking this position, Harry Truman exercised the impoundment power to cancel a squadron of, I believe it was bombers, that he had vetoed and Congress
Okay.
had passed over his veto. These things have happened across history by presidents.
Well,
And
I would just say, I feel very strongly that, again, it's not about red America or blue America or any of those things. I'm from a purple state. It's that people watch this chaotic cutting, right? And look, let's just be fair. You fire people and then hire them the next week, that's indiscriminate. That's acknowledging you've made a mistake. That's not some review that normal private sector companies would do. I don't know a damn private sector company that would fire someone on Friday and hire them back on Monday because, whoops, they made a mistake. But let's just be honest that this approach is scaring the crap out of people on the benefits they've worked their entire life for. And I know I'm out of time. Yield back.
Thank you. Probably we should try to put aside some of the fear-mongering. To my knowledge, no one in the Trump administration has advocated for taking Social Security money and using it for another purpose. So that's a hypothetical that is not only untrue, it is promoting fear. We should be telling everyone in America no one's promoting that. No one's asking for that. There are some debatable points, though. Nobody's advocating it from the post office either. Plus, the post office has no money. They're $9.5 billion in the hole every year now. But there are some real questions. The other side has called these illegal funding freezes. Well, I don't think pausing spending for a month, was what we've had so far, will be interpreted even as impoundment. There is a debate when something is actually impounded. I think if you went through a fiscal year and you get beyond a fiscal year and you haven't spent money, it's going to be classified by anybody as impoundment. There will be a legal debate over it at that time. But there will be a legal discussion, and this is a separation of powers issue. It's an important one. I actually voted against repurposing money for the wall, for building the wall last time, because I thought it was congressional perspective. So I share some of the concerns, but I think it's unfair to leap to sort of conclusions of this is illegal or this is, being done, and it's democracy's in turmoil and the world's going to end. I mean, when they stopped the money flowing at USAID, they found $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala. And if the other side wants to stand up and argue that that's really wrong, that we're going to stop $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, they can. But instead, they just say everything is illegal and Elon is terrible and Elon has all this data and Elon wasn't elected. These gentlemen weren't elected either. Their bosses won't be elected. Trump was elected, he's appointing them. So nobody in the administration's elected other than the president. They're all going to be appointed. But there's a question, when you elect a president, should they get to execute their policy? Did we elect a change, or is there some sort of bureaucracy that's so huge and inert that we can't move it? And that's what many of us have complained about for a long time. Some call it the deep state, and the other side says, oh, they're all conniving. Well, no, the deep state is essentially the bureaucracy that is unmovable and has a perspective. And their perspective is skewed towards spending more money, not less. We should debate not whether Elon Musk is Satan, but maybe whether or not, we should spend $3 million out of State Department funds on girl-centric climate change in Brazil. Whether you spend $30,000 on a trans opera in Colombia, $25,000 on a trans comic book in Peru, $660,000 on microaggressions among obese Latinx. When you say that, most people don't even know what that means. And most people Hispanic are just, frankly, offended by the whole thing, whatever it's supposed to mean. All these racial sort of things and sort of, left-wing sort of causes, we can debate that, whether we should keep spending money on it, but we wouldn't know it had Elon Musk not stopped things. We wouldn't even know it was being spent. So I, for one, think scrutiny is good. But I'm not a blank check. I've told both of the nominees today, and I've told Russ Vought, when it comes down to a year from now, if the money's being impounded, I'm probably going to be saying, send it back and let Congress vote on it. And it's also a way of making permanence. I love all the stuff he's finding, all the waste. I want it to be permanent. I want it to have real, value, and we get that through a decision. Won't be easy, but it can be done through simple majority. And my guess is that the minority party, while they're squawking about Elon looking at their Social Security number or something, they are probably not, any of them, interested in cutting the $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala. That'll be part of a rescission package, and my guess is there won't be anybody on the Democrat Party that will vote for rescission of any kind of cutting. If we give them $1 billion for an aircraft carrier and they can do it for $800 million, shouldn't we be happy to get the $200 million back, and do a rescission package? I will say publicly, though, giving it back to the taxpayer when we have a $2 trillion deficit, let's fill up the hole of the $2 trillion deficit, and then we can talk about sending some back to the people. But I think it's premature to send any of that money back. It's also premature to say it's saved until we actually have a spending bill. I think next in line we have Senator Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Edgar, thank you for joining us for your nomination hearing. I've heard concerns from numerous law enforcement officials in Arizona, including elected Republican sheriffs, about the deep strain some of these ambitious deportation operations have on their resources and ability to keep violent criminals off their streets, whether they're here legally or not, and that state and local enforcement departments across the country are already operating in very tight budgets and are facing personnel shortages, just trying to get new cops to come in. So can you commit that DHS will not deputize state and local law enforcement and personnel devoted to combating violent crime? Essentially what they're concerned about, these police officers, is that they don't mind if DHS says, hey, we're going to go and there's this criminal, let's say whatever gang or cartel member, we have a deportation order, could you come help us, City of Phoenix Police, to do a cordon and everything else like that? They're fine with that because that helps them. What they're not fine with is being deputized and made to do everyday deportation or deportation process for people that are nonviolent offenders, people that have overstayed visas or things of that nature, because, in terms of fiscal dollars and time, they just don't have the time for that, nor do they want to engage in that. So that's what these police officers, police unions, as well as sheriffs are asking, that they are not engaged in that kind of day-to-day stuff that the federal government should be focused on.
First of all, the program that you're talking about, 287G, which would go through and basically deputize the state and local law enforcement officials, is voluntary. The sheriff's organizations, the different county sheriffs sign up for that, and they
Yeah, no, I'm aware of the 287G program, and so as long as it's voluntary, it's one thing. Yeah. And largely, the best use of 287G programs are in the prisons, so that way there's ICE checks, then ICE detainer holds, so then ICE will come and do that. That doesn't actually put a strain on the police because the person's already in custody. What they're worried about is a forced 287G program where they have to actively be doing street enforcement of immigration laws, and that's what they don't want to do because they just don't have the money, more importantly than anything else. They may even have the will, they just don't have the money and time to do it.
Yeah, part of this process I went through, I met with the major county sheriffs of America and the National Sheriff's Association, and I did talk a lot about this issue. I would just say maybe we're a little bit at mixed purposes here, as I know that the president's perspective of this and Stephen Miller, who helps us coordinate across all law enforcement across the government, 287G and the relationships with the sheriffs are very important. I think what you're talking about is discretionarily, whether it's just in prisons or in jails where we're actually serving in that sort of a function in detention. But I think if you start to look at whether we're looking for the 300,000 lost children in America, I think that partnership with the sheriffs will be really critical and important to be able to, not only just in immigration, but in helping locate and find those 300,000 individuals lost under the
300,000 is not where the sheriffs are worried about. Again, they're worried that they're going to be deputized to go after the local taco vendor. They don't want to be going into farms to look for undocumented migrant workers. It's not worth their time. It's not worth the public citizens' money to do that. If you want to go after, these hardcore criminals, that's where there's alignment with the Arizona, citizen who's willing to pay them money to go after the rapists, go after these drug dealers, go after these horrible people. But it's when you're going after the Nana Tata that's been here for 10 years and has kids in the United States, they don't want the local B cop doing that. Moving on kind of into that same vein, there's a lot of fear about also the question about some of our students in schools, particularly public schools, being questioned about their status or their family status. Could you give us some commitment that we're not going to essentially turn our schools, our principals, our teachers into deputized ICE officers by asking the status of these students under the age of 18.
Yeah, I don't see that being the situation. I see what President Trump has put in place through executive order to be able to allow law enforcement to go to schools and churches. But I think I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in an area that had a gang problem, and I would have welcomed as a youth to be able to make sure that I was felt safe at my school, and as my kids grow up to make sure they feel safe. So I think that what we're
doing,
doing,
and this is why you should support local police officers is why I'm for police officers in school, but there's also a lot of kids that are actually good, innocent kids, and not all gang members are illegals, just in case you're wondering. And so, being able for them to go to school, receive services, learn, because a lot of them will eventually become citizens one way or the other legally. And by making it a place that's not safe to go, you're going to have kids skipping school, which we are already seeing all over this country, where kids are skipping school, even some that are here legally that were born in the United States because they're afraid that they're going to be followed home by ICE and their parents are going to be taken away. So this is why I'm concerned about our schools not being kind of a safe zone for kids, not for drug dealers or anything else like that, but for actually kids. Mr. Bishop, good to see you. I think we served at least 4 years together for a little bit.
That's right, Senator.
So if confirmed, you'll serve alongside Director Vogt, who said he wants federal employees to be traumatized, and we have seen that. I'm hearing horrible stories, especially some of the veterans that I served with in the Iraq War. They do feel traumatized. They've actually served their country. These guys are actually Trump supporters. They have been doing different types of work for the government. Some of them have now been laid off. So mission accomplished along that route. Can you explain the thinking behind intentionally targeting people dedicating to serving their country? And how can we trust that you're going to have the best interests of the American people at heart if the stated goal of OMB's leadership is to traumatize the very people who provide often some life-saving services to the public? And my concern, too, for some of these veterans is that they're not going to come back and work or we're not going to be able to recruit a lot of these veterans to come back and work for the federal government at some point when we're going to need to have more support.
Senator, one of the things that's very interesting is that federal workers say in surveys that they have frustration that low performers can't be moved out, they see problems in their own workplace that is the result of the way the bureaucracy operates. This quote that Director Vogt has often talked about putting workers in trauma, I know because it's sort of taken out of context, and I know I watch the way he works with folks at OMB. He has the greatest regard for the professionals at OMB, who are really stellar, and so change is difficult. There's going to need to be change to the federal government. I mean, we can all look at it and see that the $36 trillion of debt, the spending that's $2 trillion a year in deficit roughly, and going in the wrong direction. It has to be dealt with, and it's going to require change to the federal government, including to federal employees' situations. But I disavow and don't believe the idea, as many have said, that it's indiscriminate or it's designed to harm anybody. It is designed to put the federal government back on the side of the American people.
I mean, when you're firing employees that we need for stuff, it clearly is indiscriminate.
Senator Scott.
Sure. Well, first off, congratulations to both of you for your nominations. I know you're both going to do an outstanding job. So, starting you with Mr. Edgar, what's success? What do you want to get done?
I think I define success in supporting President Trump. I think he ran on the agenda to seal the border and to make sure for the interior enforcement that we're able to deport over 1 million people. And as the chief operating officer, I think there's two things: be able to execute that agenda, but there's also 22 other components within DHS that have missions that need to be executed, and that we need to be making sure that we're responsible, whether it's the Coast Guard, the Secret Service, TSA, et cetera. We need to be able to walk and chew gum. And so my opportunity of being the previous chief financial officer will allow us to make sure that we get the most for the taxpayers' money for the amount that they're paying here.
Congressman Bishop, what would you like to accomplish?
Thank you, Senator. I think you'd say that we can implement President Trump's vision to put government back on the side of the people, to get government to function more efficiently and effectively, certainly to get the out-of-control spending under control, to begin making headway on the massive debt that we otherwise will be handing to our children and grandchildren. I think his talking about Elon Musk and what Elon Musk is seeking to accomplish, they want to see actual change, not the same status quo, the same stagnance that we've seen, you and I both experienced in our service in Congress, where we know we've got to solve these problems, but yet nothing ever seems to happen. President Trump means to make it happen, and OMB is going to be a critical tool in seeing to it that it does.
Congressman Bishop, so you're a staunch supporter of getting rid of wasteful spending, do you think we can actually balance the budget?
I think the budget can be balanced. I certainly do. When and under what circumstances and how that comes out, that's the president's decision, not mine. And my priorities don't weigh in this balance. I'm serving his program. But I certainly think, I know that we can bring the federal Leviathan under control so that the American taxpayer can afford it again.
Yeah. Mr. Edgar, have you spent much time with regard to FEMA? My experience, I was governor, so I can just tell you, FEMA wasted billions of dollars. There was no logic to it, and they're involved in so many things that it never was anticipated that they would be involved in. So how would you try to fix FEMA? And they're wonderful people. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, my experience with, I dealt with mostly with the Southeast with FEMA. Gracia Check ran it, and now Barbara Sammons does. And they're wonderful people, but I mean, they're involved in so many things that doesn't make any sense.
The president came out and said one of his first directives is we need to rethink about FEMA. And, when you start taking a look at that, a couple different mechanisms. I think the funding process, I started my public service while I was a corporate guy in the local government. And, if you talk with Secretary Noem, you'll say governor, she definitely knows how the disasters are related to at the state level. And she would tell you that if she was here, that a lot of this is best done by the local government. And I think what ends up happening is FEMA gets in the way of the process. They don't know the total priorities, and I think that's what the president sees. I think it also is going to require a legislative fix. I look forward to the opportunity not only working on one side of the aisle, but both sides of the aisle. I think we need to take a look at it very systematically and look at the authorities that were given to FEMA during the DHS stack of 2002 and evaluate what would be structurally the best way. And I know you and I have talked about this privately. I would love to be able to work with you to do that.
Congressman Bishop, how inflation's out of control. It's impacting the poorest families in our country. How much is that tied to wasteful spending?
I think what Americans are seeing now, revealed every day, frankly, unfortunately, to the consternation of some, is that there is jaw-dropping waste in the federal government. Senator, I think about what you did as governor of Florida. You sat down, took your budget, went through it at great pain, line by line, and began moving to solve it. And the fiscal results you achieved there, we can do the same thing in the federal government. It's I think what President Trump is demonstrating in the first several weeks in office, with the help of DOJ, is that there's going to be action on multiple fronts all at the same time. There's going to be significant change. And I think Americans are enthusiastic to see someone finally take hold of it the way that you did when you were governor of Florida.
You guys, you're both going to be great. So I look forward to voting for your confirmation so you can get to work.
Thanks, Senator.
Thanks, Chairman.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair, and welcome to both of you, and congratulations on your nominations. I want to start with a question to both of you, and it's a simple one. If directed by the president to take action that would break the law, would you follow the law or follow the president's directive? Mr. Edgar?
I would follow President Trump because I know he's advised and he's doing a lawful job, and so I would be following the president.
Well, that's disappointing because no one is above the law in the United States of America, and your obligation and the oath you will take is to the Constitution and to the law, not to President Trump. Mr. Bishop?
Senator Hassan, I'm confident that President Trump will issue lawful orders. It would not be up to me as serving in a non-lawyer capacity to decide what is lawful and not lawful.
Well, excuse me. If you are advised by a lawyer in your agency that it is against law, or if it is clearly against the Constitution, as some of the things that President Trump has already done in this term and in his last term were, I would expect you to follow the law. And your unwillingness to say that, other members of the administration, by the way, who I voted for, have come forward and said, yeah, we'll follow the law. So it's disappointing. If a court issues an order requiring the Department of Homeland Security or the Office of Management and Budget, respectively, to take or refrain from taking specific actions, will you follow the court's order, Mr. Edgar?
Yes.
And Mr. Bishop?
Yes.
That's great. I'll turn to another question now. And this is to you, Congressman Bishop. Last month, the president unilaterally cut off nearly all federal grants before multiple federal courts determined that doing so illegally harmed Americans all across the country. This funding cut created chaos and disruption in my state of New Hampshire. For example, one of our hospitals had a federal grant to replace its sewer system. It's a small rural hospital. It applied for the grant. It got it. It was a contract with the federal government. And while this funding cut was in effect, this hospital was stuck with a $300,000 outstanding bill that was due to contractors, and the job was halfway done. So, Congressman Bishop, if you're confirmed, what will you do to ensure that federal grants are reinstated and that OMB and the Trump administration follow the law?
Senator, I'll follow the deliberative process and its outcome at OMB. And I think in that case, there was a memorandum that said some items that were implicated by the president's executive orders were paused. And the thing that you're describing, I don't think was. There was a media reaction that was alarmist.
No, it wasn't a media reaction, because when I talked with people on the ground in New Hampshire, the money wasn't flowing because the freeze was overwhelming, because nobody understood the executive orders, which, by the way, were very poorly drafted. They were so general and so imprecise that everything stopped. And I'll just note that you talked about President Truman impounding funds. That was before the Impoundment Control Act was passed in the 1970s, an act that was deemed constitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States. So what previous presidents did before the Impoundment Control Act is one thing, but if you're going to follow the law, you're going to follow the Impoundment Control Act. And it is highly disappointing to hear you, Mr. Vogt did it too, this sleight of hand, previous presidents have done it, as if the law was never passed. So I just want you to understand that the freeze has had real impacts. They are not hypotheticals, and they are impacts on money that not only was appropriated by this body, Article 1, the Congress of the United States, but signed into law by a president of the United States. Now, Mr. Edgar, I'm going to follow up on FEMA. FEMA is responsible for coordinating the federal response to disasters, and it recently fired hundreds of employees. Reporting suggests that the fired employees included not just new employees, but also some longtime employees who had recently been promoted, including some with more than a decade of experience. I'm concerned that these indiscriminate firings, done in a really sloppy manner, will harm the ability of FEMA to do its job. Mr. Edgar, can you explain how these firings will do anything other than destabilize an agency that the American people rely upon when disasters strike?
Yeah, at my current role, I'm the senior advisor to the
Right.
Secretary. I didn't make the decisions to fire the people in FEMA. My commitment, if confirmed, I'll continue to work with FEMA and make sure that we get to an operational posture that will be successful, be able to carry out the mission for the American people.
Will you stop indiscriminate firings?
I will go through and see what the data is that we're looking at, what our objectives are, and like I would do in any situation, whether it would be in federal government or the corporate world.
Well, I will just note, and to a couple of other points, I'm a former governor too. I've worked with FEMA closely. And I've had this discussion with the Secretary, whose nomination I supported. It is really important to understand that when you say, local government should do it, I have 234 towns in New Hampshire. Some of them are fewer than 1,000 people. They don't have the staff or the budget to handle major disasters. So it is going to be really important that if you are all talking about right-sizing FEMA, and making sure that it can do its work, that the investments in resilience continue so that we don't have the same natural disasters impacting the same infrastructure over and over again. And it's going to be important that we have people on the ground who can do the mission of working hand in hand, as they do, with local governments. So I look forward to trying to work up with you on that, but I hope very much that you will find out what actually happens and works with FEMA, come to us with concrete plans, and actually do some analysis before you start firing people, because it's really destabilizing, and it's going to take it's going to be hard for the agency to recover, because who's going to want to go work there? Thank you.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Bishop, Mr. Edgar, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for being here. It's great to see you both here. Congressman, let me start with you. The agency that you're going to be the deputy director of, and I believe you will be confirmed. Look forward to supporting your confirmation.
Thank you, sir.
Is a key agency, as you know, and it includes, among its many components, it includes a very key component, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA. It's a mouthful.
It is.
But that little agency, that mouthful, OIRA, does a lot, as you know. It reviews basically every agency regulation, reviews it, vets it, provides recommendations on it, does cost-benefit analysis in some cases, every agency regulation that comes through the federal government. So that office is a key node in the federal government.
No doubt.
For assessing regulations. So with that in mind, I just want to ask you some questions that I also asked Director Vogt that I think are so important for those of us who are pro-life, serving in an administration that is avowedly pro-life. Just on Title 10, this is the Title 10 grant program that currently provides money under the Biden administration, has been providing money for abortion providers. Now, I talked with the Director Vogt about this. I've talked with RFK about it. RFK committed to me that he would end Title 10 funding for abortion providers. There will be a rule that will be necessary for that. My question to you is, will you be an advocate within OMB for seeing that RFK's commitment, which is also the President's commitment, is carried through, that we stop Title 10 funding for abortion providers?
Senator, as you know, my role as Deputy Director is implement the President's policy, not my own. But certainly I have taken note of what you've articulated on the subject. It has been the source of discussion. And so there's a deliberative process at OMB and OIRA that it would be inappropriate of me to get ahead of or to foretell or forecast the result of, but thank you for articulating it. It is something that I'll take back.
Good. I just want to drill down on this, though, because this is very important, and I don't think this is in doubt. The HHS Secretary, now confirmed and sitting, has said under oath that he will overturn the current rule and put back in place President Trump's rule on Title 10 funding. The President himself has said he does not support Title 10 funding going to abortion providers. So I guess another way to ask you this question is, let me put it to you this way. Do you support the President's policy, implemented into law in his first term, articulated again since then, articulated again now by his current HHS Secretary, that Title 10 funding should not flow to abortion providers? Let me ask it that way.
In my view, the purpose of OMB and my purpose as Deputy Director will be to implement the President's policy.
Okay, good. Let me ask you about the Hyde Amendment. Will you work to ensure that all federal agencies fully comply with the Hyde Amendment, which, as you know, is statutory law and has been since 1977?
OMB does play a role in ensuring consistency and observing law across the federal agencies, and so certainly, Senator, it'll be an issue we'll give attention to.
Oh, great. And that includes, just to be clear, that includes the Hyde Amendment, which is in place and has been governing law since 1977. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, good. The Weldon Amendment. Similarly, the Weldon Amendment prevents discrimination against health care providers who have a conscience objections to abortion. The last administration essentially ignored it. It is the law. Again, in your position at OMB, as you review these regulations, as you advise on the implementation of the law, will you advise every component of the government to comply with the law, which includes the Weldon Amendment?
Senator, it will be my purpose as Deputy Director of OMB to comply with the law and see to it that other agencies and personnel within the federal government do so to the extent of my responsibility.
Good, and that includes the Weldon Amendment, correct, Congressman?
Yes, sir, Senator. Okay. That's part of the law. So
yes, good. It is. It is part of the law. The last administration seemed to forget this. Last thing, when it comes to pregnancy resource centers, pregnancy care centers, so important, provide, in many cases, completely free medical care to mothers, many of whom are facing an unexpected pregnancy, everything from health screenings to diapers, baby food, consultation, all, again, often completely free. The last administration conducted an incredible effort to attempt to persecute and shut down these pregnancy care centers. The President, in his first administration, allowed federal funding to be available and federal grants to pregnancy care centers. He said he wants to do that again. Here again, my question to you is, as you look at these grants, as you look at these regulations, will you be an advocate for the President's policies allowing federal funding to flow to these pregnancy care centers?
I will be an advocate for the President's policies on that subject, Senator. Good. And I would say one advantage that my service in Congress alongside you and working together with you on some things, Senator, provides is I did witness the evidence that you're describing about the official posture and neglect or hostility toward pregnancy resource centers in the past administration. And so I carry that experience with me into the role I seek to be confirmed to.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear you say that. And just to put a fine point on that, you know these statistics as well as I do. In the last administration, after the Dobbs decision, Hundreds of pregnancy care centers were vandalized, were firebombed, were the subject of criminal activity. And while the last administration abused federal statutes to go persecute pro-lifers who demonstrated peacefully, according to their religious beliefs, they did nothing to protect pregnancy care centers. Nothing. Hung them out to dry, allowed them to be firebombed, vandalized, criminalized, and the rest. It's absolutely outrageous, all while denying them, in many cases, grants for which they qualify under federal law. So your experience on this will be important, I think, and I look forward to you being a strong advocate in the administration. I see my time has sadly expired, and as Senator Paul knows, I always adhere to my time limits. So I'll have some questions for the record for you, Mr. Edgar, and maybe a few more for you, Congressman. Again, thank you both for being here. I look forward to supporting your nominations.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman Rand, and great to be with you. As you see, I'm 4 weeks in and still don't know which way to go in my committee rooms.
I didn't even notice, Senator, but
I'll tell you what
I was 5 years in and didn't know which way to go.
But I tell you what I do know, and that's what we need to accomplish under this administration to get this country on the right track. And a lot of it is because I served as the Attorney General in the free state of Florida and saw the ramifications of some of the policy choices of the last administration and how that affected the stability and safety in our communities. So I am glad to be here with you today, and I'm grateful that I'm given the chance to speak to you about your upcoming duties. And I don't have a ton of questions for you, Mr. Bishop. I know you very well. I know we both thought that you would be in a different position right now as Attorney General in North Carolina. And I will pray for you in your new role. I know you're going to do a great job. And God, as I can attest, God has a way of messing up our plans that we make so diligently.
No doubt. I'm thankful for it. Thank you, Senator.
Congratulations on your nomination, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to turn my attention to Mr. Edgar. When I was the Attorney General in Florida and President Biden first got in office, one of the first things he did was rescind the longstanding practice of both Democratic and Republican administrations of deporting serious felony offenders that were here illegally committing crimes back to their countries of origin. That was never something that was argued. And in that first month, they said, we're not going to do that anymore, issued completely different directives to law enforcement, in fact, started canceling detainers that sheriffs were using in jails to hold people who had committed felonies that were in our country illegally and needed to go back. So you can imagine the outcry from law enforcement when those detainers were being canceled by the Biden administration. One of the first things I did as Attorney General was sue on that practice. I believe that was one of the most dangerous things that they could have done, one of the things that put our citizens at risk, and it was not necessary. What they also started doing was taking prisoners that were in federal prisons and that were brought here from other countries or picked up in the middle of the ocean for federal prosecution and put in our prisons because they were prosecuted here only. They were sending them back to the places where they were prosecuted within the United States and releasing them into the communities, and their only connection to the United States was that they were prosecuted here. Those practices have to stop immediately. Many of those groups and organizations within DHS will be under your purview. And I know we had some time to talk about this. Do I have your commitment to go back? I sued on that practice as well to get as much information that we could to see who was being released into the state of Florida, because of course they weren't telling us. Do I have your commitment to go back and look at both of those practices and make sure that state and local law enforcement, number one, can detain, pass over to ICE so they can be deported, and that those federal prisoners are deported back to their countries?
Absolutely. And as you can see, President Trump came out of the chute very hot with not only just making sure that that ICE, the ERO group, all the law enforcement that we would focus on at DHS is really trying to get this back on track, but he's also started through his diplomatic relationships through state to get countries to receive those citizens or those migrants back into their country and their criminal folks. We've started to unlock a lot of different types of capabilities to be able to get those folks and get them out of the country in almost a nonstop method. So it's a really significant part of our process within DHS to hit that, be able to get 1 million people deported.
So much of that, however, to correct course, is going to be someone in your position going back, digging down through the directives, the emails, the guidance memos, all of those things that were done to make sure that everything is rescinded so that all of those relationships, all of those agreements, everything that the president is doing so well can be promoted and propped up by what you are doing as an agency. I think truly, and all the things that you do, getting people that are known to commit crimes against our citizens out of here as fast as possible, that has to be our #1 priority. And in that vein, the 280G program, I know one of my prior colleagues mentioned that maybe some sheriffs were saying they don't want to do that, they don't want to be a part of it. Do I have your commitment to look into additional funding for salaries, training, equipment for those agencies that either want to cooperate with you and be part of the 280G program, or maybe in states like Florida, where we have supported them and statutorily we want them to be partners with you?
Yeah, you absolutely have my commitment, and you'll probably hear in the next week or two, Secretary Noem has been working aggressively with the state of Florida. I think you guys are going to be the first ones coming out with us. Some pretty major initiatives. Your delegation of sheriffs have come and actually had an opportunity to meet with the Secretary and her staff, and we're really looking forward to working with the state of Florida.
Thank you.
Mr. Edgar, we talked a little bit about our records requests. We have done these both with the minority and the chairman when we were in reverse roles last year through letters. Then we finally sent subpoenas in January. Our hope is that you will show these subpoenas to the career officials who we believe have been obstructing us and let them know, I mean, there are repercussions for resisting a court order. I think you will be very helpful, but I think you need to make sure that all of the people that are the bureaucracy are obeying the law and will get that information to us. We're interested not only in all the dual-use research that could be gain of function or might be dangerous, classified or unclassified. We need to look at it. I mean, there are certain things that really just probably shouldn't be done. I'll give the example of Ebola. It's spread like AIDS through bodily contact and fluids. If you're doing an experiment to see if you can get it to spread through the air, I don't think we ought to be funding that. That's just too dangerous. And we need to look at all of that research to make sure people are not doing things like that. If you want to recreate the Spanish flu, you know, there are things that we probably shouldn't be doing, you know, that we can do now, but we probably shouldn't be doing. We also want to meet with the scientists. So like at the NBAC, the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center is DHL lab. It's a BSL-4. We'd like the, you know, not for a public hearing, we'd like the head of that agency or that laboratory to come in and talk to us. Be prepared to tell us about all the different gain of function or dual use research of concern, things that go on. We know that the government actually does a little bit of this through the executive branch, and the NIH coordinates it and sends it to the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We haven't been privy to any of it. I've been trying for 3 years to get it. This is not the atomic secrets. This is not personal data. This is the deliberations over this, and we should have a role. We're sending the money over the executive branch, and I hope you'll help us in that. In fact, I think you could actually assign somebody within your department that their job is to look for information concerning dangerous type of research. I don't think DHS was involved with funding the Wuhan research. It was coming out of NIH primarily, but State Department had some of this. So just looking around and being inquisitive on this will help us. Another area that we're interested in, and we have sent letters, and we'll probably resend letters and maybe subpoenas if necessary, is on the CISA censorship. And I'm pleased that y'all have already announced you're not going to do it. You know, no more government officials showing up at publications and saying, take this down. I think that was offensive to the First Amendment. They wrote a lot about it in the Twitter files. Matt Taibbi and others, when Elon Musk gave him access to the private half. Everybody in the Twitter files was talking to somebody in the government. There's a government files. I hope you'll assign somebody to look at that, because if you have people in government discussing, conspiring, colluding to take down politically protected speech, such as cloth masks don't work, which I don't think they do. And I think it's a disservice actually to tell people something works that doesn't work. And even if you disagree, it's an opinion. It's my opinion. It's a politically protected statement. And we shouldn't have the government on the other side. I hope you will assign somebody to look at the other side of the Twitter files and see if there are people who are working within government still. They say they're firing everybody. Maybe we could get rid of some of the people who don't appreciate the First Amendment or respect the First Amendment. One final thing is just for Mr. Bishop on the impoundment versus rescission. I hope you'll bring in constitutional scholars. There's a bunch of respected constitutional scholars, and at least, I know it's not particularly your job, but the OMB will look at that. We really want to send the message to the public that we're actually going to cut this spending. I'm already predicting the public is going to be disappointed come September, because what's going to happen is every day we have the news of firings and savings, but the deficit this year is still going to be $2 trillion because we haven't structurally done something. Now, people will say it's hard, Congress isn't any good at their job, they're feckless. All of that's true, but we still have to try. We're in the majority, and rescission, you sending us back money that we say we're no longer going to spend it, we're sending it back to the Treasury, is a simple majority vote. And we have simple majorities in both houses. It isn't easy, but we ought to really try, and the administration should come back to us and lobby us and get some of those who are equivocal on this and let them know how important it is to the country, because many of them are saying, and many over here are saying, well, you're just doing it improperly, it's illegal. But will they vote to cut any of the spending? Not one of them will vote to cut any spending through rescission. But we ought to really work hard to see if the majority, almost all of us will vote. We got to get everybody to vote for rescission if it does. I think it's an important debate. I do think for a couple of months you have a window of it being a pause and not an impoundment. And I think the judges are overreaching that are trying to stop you from firing people or pausing things. I think that all those things are within the realm, and it's a jump to say they're illegal. You can find one liberal judge to try to stop stuff, but ultimately decisions between our power and the executive power probably are going to work its way up to the Supreme Court. But I appreciate both of your willingness to serve, and we're going to conclude it there unless you have, my questions were pretty just general. I just wanted to give you some advice. You know, I know you wanted some advice, but we appreciate your willingness to serve. And with that, show me exactly what we have to say. Okay. The nominees have filed responses to biographical and financial questionnaires, answered pre-hearing questions submitted by the committee. They've had their financial statements reviewed by the Office of Government Ethics. Without objection, this information will be made part of the hearing record with the exception of the financial data, which are on file with the committee. The hearing will remain open until 5 p.m. today for submission of statements and questions for the record. With that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you. Good job.